Call to order. If everybody could please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. So thank you for everybody who's here with us virtually. We appreciate it. You know, it's Friday night, but we had discussed at our last meeting, making sure that we get as much information out there as we can. And we'll continue to try and do that as things are, as you know, constantly changing and evolving. So we're going to start with the only thing I guess we have is the superintendent's report, which is budget workshop number 7 for 2020-2021. That's you, Ron.
Okay. Well, thank you, George, and I'm glad to see so many people on the call. You know, this, and you could spread the word that this, anybody that's on the call, and I know it's a Friday night, and I'm certain that there are places that people would like to be rather than on a Zoom call with us right now. However, the purpose for a Friday night Board of Education meeting, which is quite unusual, is because it was expected that the governor would put out some information with regard to where we are with our revenues and our state aid. As we have expressed in previous meetings, we have a significant decline in state aid as a result of the devastating effects of COVID-19 on our economy. And the governor has expressed you know, he came forward with a second proposal for state aid that was below his original proposal, which is really unprecedented. We haven't seen that before. But now we're in a position where he also indicated that there were 15 to 20% cuts across the state that might be even more significant. So, you know, we're in a position where we held to May 15th because we were informed that the governor might give us some budget information. He did not do that. I think that with parts of the state scheduled to reopen today, I think there were other important matters on the governor's plate. And so we did not get the kind of information we anticipated. Therefore, we're a little bit disappointed because we're in a position where we want to be transparent. We want to give our community as much information as we have, but we don't have information. And so we're struggling as a district administrative team, as a Board of Education, to come up with a spending plan that makes sense for our district. I think it's important to note that if you're following the governor, you're following the news, you're following a lot of different, we locally are putting together a reopening team. On the county level, we're putting together a reopening team for schools. On the state level, we're putting together reopening teams. And everybody is trying to examine the unknowns with regard to how this virus is impacting schools moving forward. We already know that we will not be back in school through the end of the year. It was anticipated today that we would learn that there would be no summer school. I can't say that there won't be, but it was anticipated that that would be an announcement today. And then moving forward, we're being asked in these, you know, teams, these reopening teams, to reimagine what education will look like moving forward. That's an enormous task. And when we're creating a budget under traditional circumstances, meaning we're looking at a budget that for however many years our district has been in existence has been an in-person delivery system for education that relied, you know, while it changed over time and morphed into more technology, it was a traditional system, and we were funding a traditional system. In the reinvent education model that the governor is asking us to do, he has enlisted people like Bill and Melinda Gates to be on his task force. We have to create a budget using traditional education as a model, and so I think it's a unique circumstance for us. I think it's, you know, prefacing this entire meeting by saying that schools, when we create a budget and when boards of education approve a spending plan, it is a spending plan. And oftentimes there's flexibility within that plan. It's how much our community is willing to allow us to spend on the education of their children. And so it's important to note that when we do this, we create a plan that in some ways is flexible. If we find that we need, to spend more in some areas than others, we have to do that. I suspect that we're going to require more flexibility in the 2020-2021 school year than schools have ever seen before. We keep saying in the overused word of unprecedented times, but it clearly is. And we, as a district administrative team and as a Board of Education, I think we're going to need that unprecedented flexibility in our spending. And what I mean by that is we may find ourselves in a position where we have either more costs for transportation or less costs for transportation. We could find ourselves in a position where we are spending exorbitant amounts of money to clean our facilities or to purchase materials to keep children, like PPEs, plexiglass shields, all kinds of things to keep children and adults safe within our schools. So, I tend to think that there's going to be a redirect of money from one place to another. If we're in a position, and we really, at this time, it's too early to really understand the full impact, but in our reimagining and reopening plans, we're looking at upwards of a dozen different categories that we need to examine and see what the impact is with regard to equipment, with regard to operating procedures, with regard to delivery of instruction. And all of that is so complicated that it's difficult to take a traditional budget process and really understand how we're going to fund something that we don't know what it is yet. We haven't defined what it is yet. So these are just some of the challenges we have, and we're going to get into this. But I want to say that one of the things is that, so as we find savings and as we go through the process, I think, Kerry's going to do a great job. Ms. Laughlin's going to do a great job taking us through this. But as we find savings, as we move money from one area to another, when we are in a position where we have significant costs that we didn't anticipate, and we're not hitting revenue that we thought we might anticipate prior to this, we have to make these kinds of adjustments on the fly, and we are doing everything we can when we aren't certain what some of those things are. There are positions, there are items that we might try to fund that potentially we will be able to fund, but we don't know at this time yet. So I want to just preface it by saying that, and as we go through, we'll be able to probably answer many more questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Kerry to start, because I think I've spoken too long as it is. But I will also jump in, and at the end, we certainly will be able to take questions from the community. Again, this is being done. Unfortunately, we thought we'd have harder numbers, but this is being done in a way to inform the community, and it is being recorded so it can be shared so others can see it as well. So Ms. Laughlin, I believe you may be host at this point, and you'd be able to share your presentation.
Not yet. Bill, if you could turn me on.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Massera.
Thank you.
Okay, you got it.
Okay, so as Dr. Massera said, this is our 7th workshop. Unfortunately, at this time, we were supposed to be done and prepping for a vote next week. However, things have changed. So in moving forward, we're going to take a look at where we stand for 2019-2020 budget, just a recap of where we are due to the closure that we're now for full year of. We're going to go through the revenue for the following school year, talk state aid, tuition, miscellaneous revenue, go over what our total revenue is anticipated for next year. We're also going to go through our expenditures for next year, what reductions we're putting in place in order to balance the budget, and where we see our final budget being for presentation on Tuesday, the 19th, for the board to adopt. Then we'll kind of go over a little bit about what the election ballot will look like and the final timeline in these next few weeks. So in 1920 school year, the current year we're working in, we are seeing significant savings due to the closure of school. These areas of transportation, spring sports not running, some salaries, as the fact we don't have substitutes coming in, some hourly work isn't happening there. So there's various areas of savings within that. And just some overall contracts that are not being paid because the services are not being rendered at this time. Some unanticipated savings will allow us to fully fund the undesignated fund balance, that 4% legal limit. If you remember from the beginning of the budget process, we were concerned we weren't even going to reach that limit. But due to these savings, we'll actually hit 4% as well as have additional savings above and beyond that. And when that occurs, and when we close out the books, we will leave it to the board to make resolution as to which reserves we'll fund using those funds. So this is just kind of an update on our fiscal stress score, kind of taking a look at, knowing now we're going to have additional reserves and next year we're making cuts. Are we going to still be able to remain undesignated with fiscal stress? We believe we will. Our number is creeping up. If you see at the bottom of the screen where it has total points, in 2017, we were at 13 points, 2018, 23. And then 2019 down to 10. We do anticipate we'll go back up to 20 points and then possibly 23 points, but it does still keep us in no designation. These are, again, just projections based on the information we have right now going forward. So what's the framework for 2020, 2021? As Dr. Massara said, we're planning a budget for an operation that's not under a traditional education system. We're not sure what that system looks like just yet. So as we try to reinvent that, it's hard to create a budget not knowing what your programs are going to be. As Dr. Massara mentioned before, Cuomo was supposed to release state aid information today, which we were hopeful to have so we can really hone in on some of these decisions we need to make. It was not released. Guidance is not received. We're being told we may receive some information on Tuesday, potentially not till Wednesday morning, depending on what time that information. So, at our presentation for final adoption on Tuesday, we hope to have a little bit more guidance as to where we can go with some of the cuts that we need to make to our budget. So with regard to revenue for next year, did you want to jump in, Dr. Massara?
Yeah, do you want to go to the slide? Okay, so there we go. All right, this is kind of what I was talking about before. When we are planning for our revenue, we typically have the governor come out and the governor issues a budget. The legislature comes out and they usually the governor's worst case scenario. Legislature comes out, they revise it, they give us a little bit more money than that, and somewhere in the neighborhood of overall increase to our revenue is roughly 2.5% increase per year. And if you take a 4 or 5 year average, that's what we're going to see every year. Our revenue increases. Now, in order to fund a school, revenue and expenses need to move at an equal rate. If they're not, if expenses are moving higher than our revenue, we find ourselves in trouble. Obviously, if revenue is outpacing our expenditures, well, then we can add program, we can do things like that. But what we're finding is that, when we project out and when we project out what we expect our revenue to be, and if we expect a 2.5% increase in our revenues, it becomes challenging when we in fact see a reduction in revenues. Because if we're projecting that taking out the state aid, taking out the levy that falls on the homeowners in our community, other revenues we expect are going to increase upwards of $800,000. Upwards of $500,000. So if you take, or $500,000, but if you take out if you lose $400,000 in revenue, we become in a position where now our whole, the difference between where we were going with our revenue and where our expenditures, which don't go down, are increasing, our whole becomes $800,000, maybe $900,000. And so it becomes a significant problem for us. So when people hear we've lost $450,000 in revenue, they think, oh, well, you got to make up $400,000. That's not the case. You got to make up at least double that because of the loss of what we would have been able to pace our expenses with. So I think that that's important information that people need to see. And so, right now, all we can do is plan on what we know. I had conversation with legislators today because when the governor didn't make his announcement, I made a couple of calls and I did get advice. And the advice I received was, Ron, if I were you, what I would do is I would just work off the numbers we have right now, put together a budget based on where you're at. Don't go to 5, 10, 15, 20% cuts. Stick where you are. You're already conservative. And, if there are additional cuts, then you can adjust accordingly. Or, we may get a little bit of a backfill with some federal relief in a stimulus package. So, that being said, that has been my recommendation to the board, that we take our revenue as we know it is, and we move forward and put together a spending plan that takes into account precisely where we are at this moment with the best available information.
So with that, we'll go into a little bit more depth of the revenue of where we stand right now. Just kind of a timeline where state aid, if we go back to January when we started the budget process, we received a governor's run, preliminary runs, which provided for a 2.82% increase of state aid. That was $360,000. And on April 1st, the legislative budget came out and they actually decided, under the situation we're currently in with the pandemic, they're going to hold state aid flat to the 2019-20 school year. So they pulled back that $360,000 originally thought we were getting throughout the budget process. Then on top of that, we have a pandemic aid adjustment that they put into the budget to decrease it by another $100,000. On top of that, we had to then adjust transportation aid because we're not paying for transportation for these months that we're in closure. So that's an anticipated decrease of another $164,000. So overall, budget to budget, our revenue has reduced in state aid by $429,000. But from the governor's run, when he started in January, the loss during the budget planning process is actually $790,000. So to Dr. Massara's point, where things are kind of compounding all at once, this is where we're seeing it most, and that's what state aid. We were planning a budget with an increase, plus that increase plus more money on top of that, and we now had to adjust our budget accordingly. So with regards to tuition, as we've been saying throughout the whole budget process, tuition rates have been on a decline. Our Seneca Falls rate has decreased just based on the lower expenditures that we have within those tuition categories. So that revenue reduction is $425,000 for next year. Our special education program, the 811 program, where we have quite a few kids that come into our programs that we offer, the enrollment has declined, and that's simply based on student needs. So there is a revenue reduction there as well going into next year of $245,000. However, our Native American tuition is increased. That is a similar formula to the Seneca Falls for what we charge each branches. There is a slight variation in that formula, but we do have a revenue increase on that $448,000. That's simply based on enrollment as well as the rate increase in that area. So total revenue reduction is $223,000 net on tuition. So with regards to the tax levy and miscellaneous revenue, as we've stated before, we're staying within the tax cap. It's 1.65%, and that provides for an increase of just under $400,000 budget to budget. However, our miscellaneous revenue areas, interest rate, our private and parochial tuition that we bill out, our health services and tuition that we bill out, E-rate reimbursements, those are all on a decline. So we do have a miscellaneous revenue decrease of $160,000. So budget to budget, our revenue reduction from 2019-20 to the 2020-21 school year is just under $420,000 just on revenue alone. So if we go ahead and project, oops, sorry, lost that one. As Dr. Massara was saying, if looking at what our average revenues typically are and how we begin our budget process and planning, we usually see just over 2% in revenue increases year to year. So based on that historical data, we thought we would maybe see $880,000 on revenue in the 2020-2021 school year. Taking that with the actual revenue decrease of $400,000, we're actually $1.2 million reduction in the budget just on the revenue side. And so our expenses need to keep up with our revenues, or vice versa. And when they're not, now we find ourselves in a situation where we are right now, trying to balance a budget in a hard economic time. So with regards to expenditures for next school year, these are just some items that we have already enacted. We've already presented to the public at our last meeting. We had access to secondary teachers, consolidated our middle school basketball and volleyball team to just one team for each boys and one for girls, eliminated the intramurals at the middle school. We pulled out the guard booth that we were going to put in at the high school, reduced some repair lines, reduced conferences. And in addition, we do have salary freezes from the superintendent, all three assistant superintendents in district office, as well as our technology team. And we thank all of them for that support in trying to save program essentially for these students going forward.
And we thank you guys as well for doing that.
Yes, thank you.
So in summary, our expenses on the left side of it, you can see our salaries are up just over 700, as well as our benefits. Our tuition for out of placement students, those are our students in Center Riches that go to another school because we can't support the needs within our four walls of our classrooms. That has also increased about $200,000. But then on the other side, we do have some expenses that are decreasing and helping us out. Transportation is on a decline, primarily because we've entered into some agreements, intermunicipal agreements with Riverhead School District to help transport our private and parochial school students at a much less cost than what we were in the past. We had debt fall off the books, and we have a decline in supplies as we've been going through our budget and trying to see where we can kind of trim away money overall. So we have total expense increase of $1.8 million. The total impact on the budget, if we take everything as a whole, our revenue decline of 1,000, our expense increase of 1.2 million, it's a total impact on the budget of $1.6 million. So we then the board and throughout our presentation, we've been sharing, we are going to increase our applied reserves, an additional 830,000 to applied reserves, and that's using the ERS and TRS and unemployment reserve. That ends up being, we need to reduce our expenditures another $844,000 to balance the budget. So as we try to figure out what that looks like, we're planning for an unknown school year. We don't know what the educational system is going to look like next year. We're doing the best with the information we have right now. We're continuing to explore many options, and we hope to have a lot of those things finalized in the next couple of weeks. But for sake of adopting an expenditure plan and a budget, we do need to continue to move forward. But we are in contract negotiations with all of our vendors. We are still working with all of our bargaining units for further concessions to help save money in areas. We do have a potential to reduce our district-wide insurance cost, not the health insurance, but that's the insurance that we have, our liability insurance. And we can possibly consolidate bus routes even further based on the efficiency study that we're in the process of doing right now. Changing the mile limits that we are using 10 big buses. It's maybe we only use 9 or 8. And that's just simply as a result of enrollment dropping to see if we can maybe save a little bit of money there. So in these different areas, we actually could save about $500,000 on the budget expenses. And if we realize those savings within the next few weeks, or even from now until July 1, we'll actually be able to start putting some items that we're proposing to take out back into the budget and help out our programs. So this is a list of things that we have proposed to close the gap of $844,000. This list is in no way of a priority order. It is just as administrators, we've been meeting every day for the past week, kind of going through what do we have out there that we can maybe pull out and have the least impact on kids. That's our goal, is to try to not hurt the program. So you can see we did further reduce our supply lines. Our arts and education program, we eliminated the district funding side. We're grateful the PTA has been helping support that, and we're hoping they can continue to support that moving forward. We have some additional salary freezes, as I mentioned before. District-sponsored field trips will be eliminated. It will be only those trips that students pay for that will be taking place. Extracurricular clubs are going to be cut in half. It's going to be up to the building level principals to decide which clubs will be running with the budget they're provided with. We've reduced professional development a little bit further. We chose that we can definitely eliminate at least one bus run due to the lower enrollment numbers. We've reduced our athletic budget overall, and what that number, it's a very large number, I know that, but what that entails is some equipment that we purchased this year for spring sports and did not use, we don't need to purchase again next year. And they can use some of those supplies this year into next year, as well as Mr. Thode is looking at how he can try to maybe eliminate some scrimmages or non-competitive games in order to help save on the budget and not impact the sports program as a whole. We have looked at the IB primary years program annual fee, not paying the annual fee, but continuing the work that they're doing and moving forward as we are a few years out from certification in that area. So they're continuing that work, but we just want to incur the fee for it. We're eliminating a part-time grounds position. We're eliminating part-time clerical support. We're reducing the kindergarten monitors to one shared monitor, accessing one secondary English teacher, accessing one full-time clerical staff member, consolidating some personnel positions that we cannot disclose at this time, as well as looking at reducing class to a 0.4 FTE. So like I said, these are items that we are putting into the budget right now to close the budget gap. However, should we start seeing savings from the items we just previously discussed in the slide prior, we will be looking at this and putting items back into the budget that can help keep our program running.
And Carrie, if I can just jump in, I think, yeah, and that's the big idea is that, you know, wherever we can find those kinds of savings, there's the flexibility in the spending plan is that we go back to these things and try to get as much of this back into our budget as possible. And there's the great unknown right now.
So in order to present a balanced budget on Tuesday to the board for adoption, our spending plan is $44,511,736. It's a 0.93% budget to budget increase. Further adjustments, like we've mentioned, that we're looking at and waiting for, we may receive money from a federal stimulus package that can backfill some of the lost revenues that will allow us to put some items back in the budget. Some mid-year cuts to state aid could still occur, which would reduce revenue, which would force us to maybe pull more items back out of the budget, as well as the concessions on the expenditure budget that we might be able to start seeing in the coming weeks with our conversations we're having with both employees and vendors that can help us put some items back in the budget. So as Dr. Massara mentioned at the beginning of this, is we're always looking at a fluid budget cycle. The budget is ever changing. What the community adopts is an expenditure number that we cannot go over, and we lay out the plan for you throughout this budget process. Like Dr. Massara said, next year we're going to need so much flexibility in that spending plan because we don't know what the educational program is going to look like. So a lot of the buckets of where the money is moving, if we don't run fall sports, then maybe we can take that money and put back a teacher or some support staff in those different areas. And those are things that we're going to be watching very closely throughout the budget next year. It's going to be almost a weekly watch of the expenditures to see where we are and what we can continue to do. So with regards to the budget ballot, what you will see is on there is going to be three things. The budget vote itself, asking on a total expenditure budget. We will be remaining within the tax cap. The Board of Education, there are 2 seats up for election. There's 3 candidates running, and they will be listed on the ballot in the order you see there: Danielle Dench, Josh Foster, and Robin Rayburn. And then we also have a third proposition on there, which is the energy performance contract. And if you've been following us throughout the budget process, we've been talking about this often. Back in December of 2019, the board approved a contract with Johnson Controls to perform an energy performance project. That project will result in $350,000 savings annually. And in turn, that pays for the project itself. So there's no cost to the taxpayer for this. But what we are asking the community to do is vote on that contract. And if we have a successful vote, the district will receive extra 10% of state aid on the project, which would result in $600,000 over the course of 15 years. So that's just added revenue to the district on something that we're already moving forward with. We'll continue to see savings throughout that process and possibly bring in additional revenue if we are successful in that vote.
So, Kerry, can I just ask a question just for clarity on that?
Sure.
When it says the project results in greener facilities, that's great as well for annual expenditure savings of 315. Just so that everybody's clear, what is in this budget that is being presented regarding the expenditure savings from the EPC?
So we're not going to start seeing those savings until obviously we do the project. So we're probably looking at the 21, 22 cycle. But it's going to be more utility costs, electric costs, heating. Those are the areas that we'll start seeing those savings. Even some of the maintenance costs, our overhead costs with our buildings and grounds guys, with the work that they're doing of changing filters and unit ventilators. We're replacing a lot of those unit ventilators. So a lot of that work that those guys spend a lot of time on throughout the winter and over the summer months, they won't have to do any longer. So that alleviates them to spend time on that.
But to be clear, that savings isn't in this year's budget because the work will have to get done prior to receiving those savings. And when does that start to hit? The savings start to hit?
We would start seeing the savings in year one. We have the project has not even gotten up to SED. They, you know, obviously the timeline got a little skewed right now with everything going on. We were not allowed to let anybody in the building for them to finish their final proposal with that. We have to get it up to the state. We anticipate getting it up to the state hopefully within the next few weeks. And then once the state approves it, which I hear they are actually processing energy performance contracts a little faster than they used to in the past. They've hired some people. So we could hopefully begin the work on this. Our goal was in October of 2020.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I think that that's you know, this is really a great project, and I think that this is one that we really want the community to fully understand, because you know, obviously the board is behind it, because we know that, you know, it's number one, it's, you know, it's a cost savings, but you know, furthermore, you know, the idea of going green is something that we certainly want to contribute, you know, and reduce our carbon footprint in the world. But you know, if the community really understands this, you know, this idea that a community vote getting an extra 10% of state aid on the project, you know, really can help us with that $600,000 in state aid. We will be working to communicate that effectively too. We have a great communications company working with us to support us in that.
So just a quick overview of the budget timeline as a whole. The next board meeting is May 19th at 7:30. That is Tuesday, where we will be adopting the final budget at that meeting. The budget hearing is then set for May 27th, the following Wednesday at 6 p.m. Then the budget vote is absentee ballot only. A ballot will be mailed to every single registered voter that we have in the district, and it will be a self-addressed stamped envelope for return. The ballots are due back to the district clerk no later than 5 p.m. on the 9th. Our goal, the envelopes actually just arrived today, so we are set to go. Once the budget is adopted, we can get the ballots printed. And our goal is to try to get these ballots mailed out to the community the first week of June so that there's ample time to get it to the voters, have them take a look at it, respond, and mail it back to us. If you can't mail it back to us, you're unsure of your timeline, they will always be dropped off at district office to be received and held on to until June 9th. Does the board have any further questions?
I do not, Carrie. That was a very thorough presentation. Thank you for that. And we certainly appreciate all the hard work that you guys are doing on this. We know there's so many moving parts. So thank you. Does anybody have any questions on the board?
I don't have any questions.
Tom?
That was a great.
Nope.
Okay. All right, so then that leads us to the questions and comments regarding tonight's agenda only from the community. This is an opportunity for people who wish to speak or have written letters to the board regarding topics that are included on this agenda. So as we've done with the virtual meetings, if you can use the hand raising function, and Bill Nofi will recognize you, and we'll get you into the audio. So whenever you're ready, Bill.
All right. We're ready. Okay, I have one. McGill family iPhone.
Hey, everybody. I have just a couple of quick questions. The first one is for Kerry. What did we apply last year from the ERS, TRS, and unemployment reserves as a total dollar
We did
amount?
not use those reserves last year. We used our debt service reserve. It was $46,000 from debt service that we used last year. We did not use anything from any of the other reserves.
And the plan for this year is to apply over $800,000 from those three reserves?
Right, so it's 35,000 from unemployment, which is what's in the unemployment expense side of the budget. It's about $700,000 from ERS, which is the anticipated expense on the ERS bill, and about $100,000 from TRS to help offset that cost. Now, that is only if we need to use it. Those reserves, putting it in the budget, it allows us to go ahead and use it. However, at the end of the school year, if we find we have, excess funds, we have surplus, we'll be putting that money back into those to help with the flow of the reserves itself.
And what percentage of the ERS fund balance is that?
It's about 50%.
That's an enormous Band-Aid for next year. Like, that's a concerningly enormous Band-Aid. People understand. I understand you have to adopt a spending plan. You don't adopt a line item budget. So all you're doing is you're taking your tax cap and you're holding your state aid, flat from last year, and you're going to adopt a spending plan that matches what your total, revenue is going to include. But that's not going to get backfilled on savings at the end of this year, like the 1.1 that you're going to apply. I just have a question. What percentage of our revenue was state aid last year, or for this school year? What percentage of our revenue was state aid?
Our revenue is, state aid revenue is about 20-30%.
And then this year, if the state aid stays flat?
It's the same because our budget's only going up 0.9%, so it's virtually the same.
So the loss of state aid, or the flattening of state aid, is really not what is putting us in this kind of dire financial position. It's more the revenue reduction from tuition.
It's overall because our expenditures are outpacing our revenues as a whole. So if like Dr. Massaro was saying, is if we can't keep up pace of our revenue with the expenditures just on our contractual increases that we have year over year, then we're in a hole altogether.
Okay, and I just have another question. You showed slides for savings since school has been closed. What was the savings for the spring sports, the spring athletics?
It was, hang on,
It was like 80.
over $100,000. That's a result of salaries.
So that was the 126,000 approximately?
Yep.
So then my question is this. So we saved, by not having an entire season of sports, $126,000, but we're looking to cut or possibly cut $130,000 from athletics next year. That certainly doesn't add up to equipment only. If we save an entire season less than we're looking to cut, it's essentially tantamount to cutting an entire season of sports.
Well, we didn't save the entire season. We do have some expenses for spring sports because the sports season did start prior to the closure of school. So we did still have to pay our coaches a portion of what they were to be earning for the season. With regards to next year reductions, it's pulling out some of the games that are not on the
Non-league games.
The non-league games, thank you. As well as Section 11 is giving a credit to the district next year due to the officials' fees that we paid for this year and are not using. So that credit is coming to us next year in our bill. So that's reflected as part of that $100,000 savings. So it's a combination of different things. We also start seeing, by not running some non-league games away, we see a little bit of transportation savings along with supplies and supervision for some of those games. We don't need that extra supervision. So I wouldn't say you really could compare it apples to apples because there's so many different pieces to both parts that are resulting in the savings for this current school year, as well as what we see we can pull out of next year's budget.
And I've been, reading in the newspaper, a bunch of other districts have already adopted their budgets for next year. Have you had conversations with any of the school districts with respect to what they're doing as far as their anticipated state aid? I totally appreciate talking to politicians, but I can't find a politician who would say, yeah, go ahead and cut your budget, by 20 cents. Yeah,
So
the answer they
Heather,
gave me was very political.
okay, let me jump in there if I could, Heather, because yes, I am very connected. Yesterday, I was on a call with the House of Delegates, which is at the state level. I represent the region on the state level. So I was with the New York State Council of School Superintendents on a leadership call where, yes, we had conversations about how people are handling this. I'm also very active in the region as the president-elect of Suffolk County School Superintendents. So I'm very much in tune with what everybody's doing. And we are all in this together, and we are all working under the same things. I can assure you that we're not doing anything that is looking to be detrimental. What we're looking to do is try to save as much as we can for the kids in Center Moriches. And it's not different than what, my colleagues that I greatly respect, the approach that they're taking.
So most other districts are doing the same thing. They're adopting spending plans and considering that state aid will stay flat from last year to this year. That's like the prevailing.
I can't say most districts, but I am, in touch with a core group of people that are, some of the, superintendents I respect in the region. And they are looking at it at face value that, some are looking at it differently, but, we're in a unique position because our levy's low. I have colleagues that had levies that were upwards of, and they had debt service and they had levies of upwards of 6%. And they're coming in the, the 3-5 range because they can. So it's everybody's in a different predicament with regard to their funding of reserves, with regard to their ability to withstand these kinds of challenges. So you really can't compare necessarily one district to another.
Okay, and then just my last question. It's been a really, really long time since I looked at any of the contracts we have in the district, but do we have force majeure clauses in any of those contracts?
What was that clause?
A force majeure, like an act of God, pandemic, those unforeseen that allow us to renegotiate terms during the course of the unforeseen act that would allow us to potentially negotiate some of these contracts better for the duration of the pandemic or expenses related directly to the pandemic?
So we talked to our outside counsel on that exact issue a number of times from the employment perspective and other perspective. And on the employment side, the guidance we've got is, exactly what we're doing, when we are able to say we are. In certain instances with vendors, including, our bus company, we've taken action along the lines of what we are able to do. But I think the answer to your question is where we're not contractually obligated to pay under those contracts, we're saving.
Mm-hmm.
Hey,
I'm asking mostly, obviously, from a personnel perspective, because that's where this significant.
From a personnel perspective, literally day one, as you'd imagine, it was the question that I asked, and asked like 3 times to our guys and to our lawyers, and there's tons of guidance from the state as to what you can do and what you can't do under these contracts, and from council, and we're doing exactly what we are able to do. In terms of, the short answer to your question is, for an employment contract like this, we've been told that you can't, that your pay, you got an obligation to pay, you've got union contracts, and that's that.
Right. Yeah. But there's other aspects to those contracts other than, say the amount. There could be number of individuals that you have to maintain, class sizes, things that are not to the dollar, but to the structure of the contract.
Yep. Hey, can I just address, I just want to ask Carrie on your first, so Heather's point on the $700,000 or $800,000 is a good point, but Carrie, can you just talk for a minute about how we've gotten comfortable there, given the increased surplus from this year, and why it's a whole, we do have that increased surplus, and how that kind of plays out.
Our goal is to take that increased surplus and fund the reserve in order to use the reserve next year. While we know, and we've stated before, it is a one-time fix to a long-term problem that we have to continue to monitor. We do feel that by having the reserves this year, the surplus this year, to put into that reserve to use for next year, we should be comfortable enough to do it, which is why we also looked at the fiscal stress of the district by doing this, to see, are we putting ourselves in fiscal stress?
I want everybody to hear and just make sure I was clear, because I assumed, well, not assumed, but I understood what you just said to be the case. We have incremental savings this year that's unanticipated, that goes into these reserve accounts that we are then able to apply next year. And it's not dollar for dollar net, Perry, but it's pretty close. It's not that, wow, we've got an $800,000 bank account now that goes to zero. Heather, next year. That's
So the this year's surplus is not being applied to next year's revenues?
It's being applied in the sense that it's going to go into the reserves to apply it that way. A lot of districts are talking about whether or not we can go above the 4%. But then some of us are saying, why take a risk of having an audit filing or finding that you went over 4%, and the board has the authority to just fund the reserves with those surplus and then allocate the reserves to next year's budget to help offset some of these revenue reductions we're seeing in state aid. So that, I think you'll start seeing across the board and across Long Island of districts of what they're doing with their surpluses, is either they're going to go above 4% to go up on the risk, or they're funding their reserves like we're doing, and then using those reserves in the next year to help offset some of the expenses.
So it really it could look like a net application of only like $200,000 from ERS if you take this year's surplus. Say you applied it back to ERS and then took 700,000, 800,000 out. So it's really only like a net application of about 200,000.
Correct.
Incremental to our typical 1.1 that we've done every year, which we've been able to back through careful budget management.
Right. Well, and hopefully you'll be able to do that next year too, but you just never know.
I think next year is going to be a vast unknown.
And then obviously the only other piece then with the ERS is, those rates fluctuate with the market, and depending how things look next year, what you have to pay into ERS could increase exponentially. We've had that problem in the recent
It
past.
could increase. However, those rates operate on a 5-year trend.
Right.
So we shouldn't feel the impact immediately. We should,
That smooths
in
it.
2 years from now, we'll probably feel this year's impact on ERS.
It's just something we have to keep our eye on.
Listen, one of the things,
That's a smoothing on that, and you can anticipate them coming up down the road, certainly.
and one of the things that we've kind of thought about and talked about is exactly that. Whether home values go down as a result of this, which creates kind of pressure on tax levies, all of these different things, and not completely depleting our reserve, which we've got now to maintain a program for a year and then leave us with an empty bank account, but taking the medicine that we have to take early and careful so that we can maintain kind of the good programs that we've got, even in kind of the face of what I expect to be difficult times for 2 or 3 years. I don't think this is a 1-year issue. I think it's a 2 or 3 year issue, and I think we get through it if we're careful. But I think this budget, frankly, is that. I think it's a careful budget. It kind of stinks to be in this situation, but it is what it is.
And we talk about some of the units, all the employees in the district are taking it very seriously. When we went to people and we said, hey, we really need to get concessions from some people. I just have to say that with a lot of gratitude, I can say that everybody took that very seriously. And while we can't really talk about that right now because those deals are not finalized, we have considerable concessions from almost all our employees, and that's going to be a real help for us as we move forward.
Yeah. It's good to hear. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Heather. Bill?
Let's see. Nobody yet. Nope. No more hands.
Okay.
Hey, I'm sorry. Can I just ask a question? I did have one, if nobody else has one, I did have one question. On that FLES, the .4 FLES, can you explain how that looks? Just what does that mean, you know, generally speaking, for a kid in second grade, third grade, fifth grade, whatever?
Yeah. So in terms of the FLES, and Rainey, you can help me out with this a little bit too. But we had, when FLES was brought in, it was brought in to the elementary school, and it was brought in stages. So fourth and fifth grade received instruction in foreign language in the elementary school, and then last year we were able to extend and make it kindergarten through fifth grade. We are fortunate that we have Ms. Jackson in the elementary school, who actually was a FLES teacher. And part of the reason, one of the cuts in there is in the PYP funding, for the annual fee. We have an expert in that. She was a PYP coordinator, and also was a FLES teacher. So we feel like she can help support some of the things. She can't get into the classrooms and teach, but she can support the idea of keeping FLES alive in that elementary school while we recover and try to rebuild and in the coming years and get that program back. Is that what you were looking at, Josh?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to understand. So effectively what you're saying is there will be kind of management of a program that will be administered in some way by the teachers in the classroom.
Yeah, we're gonna do our best so that we can keep that program going through the elementary school. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Raina, that sum it up for?
Yeah, pretty much. It's to maintain the program, doing with a little bit less personnel. And
Yeah.
It won't be exactly the same, but it's a significant growth for us, so we're not going to let it go. We're going to work with what we have.
And with hopes that as we have if we realize some of that $500,000 in savings we're seeking, we may be able to put something like that fully back in.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm trying to raise my hand, but I don't know.
Okay, you're on.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I unmuted myself. I wasn't sure. Hi, I just wanted to, first of all, I really want to thank the superintendents for taking the pay freeze voluntarily. I think that shows a huge commitment to our district, and I'm very appreciative of it. Going back to the FLES, so as of this moment, we're not paying into the PYP, so we don't technically need the foreign language in the elementary school. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're going to be on a pause, on our PYP path if in fact this is where we land, but that doesn't stop the work.
Oh yeah.
Philosophically to that, we know that the reason we're doing it is because we know it's good for kids, and we know we've got some expertise in some of the people that are kind of leading that charge. And we feel like when it's time and we can go back to this, we can be very successful at attaining that, accreditation, when the time is right.
Oh yeah, no, I think that was a smart cut. And I just wonder if at any point, I know this is sort of one of those unknowns, but if we're on a staggered schedule or we are doing a 2 or 3 day week, again, we don't really know what September is going to look like. Is there more of an option for savings with the transportation? Has anybody thought about that?
Yeah, see, that's the thing is, and I'm trying to have this conversation from 30,000 feet, as opposed to trying to get into the weeds, because I think if we're on an A day, B day schedule, like some people have discussed, sure. You're transporting half the amount of kids as you normally would. Clearly that would result in transportation runs being eliminated. Quite the contrary, if we were told and directed to go to a AM PM schedule, we'd be adding transportation runs. So that, those are some of the unknowns, and so like right now we're not in a position where we can effectively make a decision on that and budget accordingly. And that's kind of where I started to say that if we're trying to use a traditional funding system to fund a system that we have not yet defined. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yes, no, thank you. I understand that it's really unknown right now, but again, thank you to the superintendents for taking that voluntary freeze. I think that's very helpful and again, shows a lot of commitment. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill?
No hands raised.
Okay. So that leads us to dates to remember. The next Board of Education meeting will be May 19th at 7:30 p.m. And you'll be getting a Zoom link to that as well. So hopefully you can join us virtually as we continue to try to navigate some difficult times. So thank you, everybody. Motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Motion second.
Motion.
All in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a good
everyone.
night.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Appreciate
everybody.
everyone being here. Thank you.